Welcome to Done with Debauchery, a podcast hosted by Denise and Keisha, two friends who share intimate conversations about alcohol and drug use, struggling with sobriety, and our personal paths to wellness.
Hi. Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm starting to crash a little bit, I think, right now. For those of you that don't know, Keisha obviously is aware I'm coming out the other end of having COVID. So day by day, I'm getting just a little bit better.
It's been a long road. Long and treacherous.
Been like a long solo experience. Like, it really starts to get to you after having to stay inside and like isolated for a while.
Yeah, you were inside for 5 to 7 days. I feel like all by yourself.
I guess like the isolation period is the 5 days, but then even though you start to try to do things on, or at least for me, on the 6th or 7th day, like I still didn't have the energy, which was like frustrating because I wanted to get things done. And then I would do like 2 activities and be completely gassed.
Yeah.
So.
And I had to take on the Dr. Denise role and tell you to stay home in bed and rest and listen to what your body's telling you.
Yeah, Keisha was really giving out a lot of prescribed medical advice on, you know, what would be good life choices for me to heal so that I could be here today with everyone and recording an episode. So I would like to report I've taken about 80% of the advice she gave me. I, you know, did eat some sugar and had some pizza along the way. So
which usually that's my advice.
I know, the tables have really reversed.
Well, I'm glad you're feeling better. It is a pleasure to have you here in my kitchen.
I know, me too.
Good stuff. So welcome back to another episode of Done with Debauchery. I'm Keisha, and this is my co-host, Denise.
Hello.
Today we're talking about a topic I think that a lot of people can really relate to. It's something that Denise and I both have personal experiences with. And I think that it's something that like a lot of people that have issues with alcohol or different substance use experience, and that is disordered eating and the link with addiction.
Yeah, I think it's not something that people talk about like happening together, or is, I guess the technical term is comorbidity, but it's something like in my own personal experience that, you know, they always kind of went hand in hand, disordered eating and substance abuse or use. And I think all the way back for me from when I was a teenager.
So for people that are not maybe familiar with what disordered eating means or what that looks like, are you able to kind of break it down for us?
Yeah, I guess I can give my opinion, and I think part of it will lie in the fact that I don't always agree with labels, and one of the reasons that I want to lean towards, you know, the words disordered eating versus an eating disorder is because an eating disorder is going to be something that, you know, follows the specific criteria in terms of diagnostics in the DSM manual, where I think a lot of people, at least for me in my experience, may eat in disordered ways that cause a lot of mental stress, and are definitely not healthy, but may swing from restriction to binging to purging, or may purge in other ways and don't fall into those like really traditional categories of, you know, anorexia, bulimia, that a lot of us are really, really aware of. So I personally think disordered eating is defined as, you know, I think extreme focus, and I want to almost say obsessive tendencies in terms of food. So whether that goes to tracking macros or counting calories, and applying that to exercise and kind of just that mathematical component. It could have to do with extreme amounts of restriction. It could have to do with binging. It could have all of those things mixed into one. And I think it's also just like a complete obsession in thinking about eating and how much you're expending. At least that's what it means for me. What's your opinion of it?
Yeah, I think that pretty much hits like the nail on the head. It really is, I think, that place before what would be classified as an eating disorder. It doesn't have that same strong label and that same, I think, psychological like characteristic.
Like a hook.
Yeah,
Almost.
exactly. Where like maybe you are a little bit more aware that you are doing these things, but still unable to stop. So like you said, like really restricting, but then binging right after. And like beating yourself up about it that way.
And I think I was going to say that beating yourself up part. And I think once you have also like self-worth or these really strong opinions over what's good and what's bad instead of things just being food, I think that really plays into disordered eating for me as well, because there is this like, I'm a bad person component that comes up in my self-criticism or in my thought patterns. And foods are very black and white. Like, this is good, this is bad, it has to be like this. And it's like, it isn't so, extreme one way or the other. It's just food. So I think for me, there is like there's a lot of weight on the mental component and this like good versus bad behavior of making one choice versus another.
Yeah, and even though it kind of is, it's almost like having an extreme control over yourself, but not in a positive way where like you're in touch with your decisions and your intentions behind them. Like you're almost like controlling and manipulating yourself into eating these ways. And like, oh, I can't have that today because I had it yesterday. So now that means I can't have any of these XYZ things today. You like really restrict that way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that control mechanism really plays into a lot of it for me. And I think that from what I understand is that if you grew up, like a lot of people that grew up in very strict or unpredictable households where maybe a caregiver's behavior was just unpredictable, a lot of children that grow up in those environments will exert control through disordered eating patterns because they feel as though their environment, their home environment, is out of control, and their body or their food choices is kind of like almost like a statement or like a rebellion, that's that one piece that they have in control, and it's almost like it creates this false sense of psychological safety.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that like in that really crucial adolescent development phase is when a lot of these habits come to surface, as well as substance abuse. Like they sort of go hand in hand in your teenage years where you're really like, you don't usually have a lot of control over any aspect of your life. You don't choose what school you go to in most cases. The only thing you really have that is yours is kind of what you are putting into your body.
Yeah. Yeah, and like the numbers of overlap are quite high. I think part of the challenge in getting, really clear statistics on, what is the percentage of comorbidity between, let's say disordered eating or eating disorders and substance use is that there is a lack of clarity on how those things are defined, whether, it's through official medical diagnostics or it's a little bit more on a spectrum, but it also has to do with the difficulty of tracking these types of behaviors, right?
Because not everyone's disclosing it.
Exactly. And I think like, is it just substances like alcohol and drugs, or is it going to be inclusive of people that may abuse laxatives as a substance, which would be a very disordered eating type behavior, or even diet pills. And I know for myself, when I was a teenager, I feel like my disordered eating started first, likely because that's what was accessible to me. I had control over that. I wanted to change my body. And so, I didn't have to stand outside of a liquor store and ask somebody to buy something for me. Like, I could just choose not to eat.
Yeah.
So I think for me that's kind of what showed up first. But then once I became aware that I could be using, drugs that were like speedy, to be restricting my appetite in a very extreme way.
It was like a double whammy.
Using, methamphetamines and using MDMA, and I wouldn't eat for like 24 hours straight, no problem, like couldn't even put food in my mouth. Then I was like, wow, like I can use these things to A, party, and I feel like I'm on top of the world, and then B, I'm not gonna eat any food. So like that was a really attractive quality of drug use for me when I was a teenager.
Yeah. And I think that overall, like what you said, like there is such a strong link between eating disorders or disordered eating and just addiction in general. Like just that same kind of drive to do something repeatedly. For me, like looking back and reflecting, I feel like my relationship with disordered eating definitely started when I was in high school as well. And I started modeling. It was something that I really wanted, but I'm just naturally a curvy person. So there was a lot of pressure on me, like through the agency that I was with, to change the way that my body looked. And like I wanted that as well because I wanted to be successful. I wanted to feel like I was good enough. So I really did start dieting and exercising and controlling what I was eating to try and lose weight. And I remember going in and actually having her measure my hips at one point and tell me when I was getting closer to like the ideal hip dimensions that I was really starting to get like that beautiful, it was almost like a concave, like mark on my butt cheek where it actually was like indented in because like I had lost so much weight, but I was getting like positive feedback for that, and I'll always remember that. And then after that is when I started experimenting with drugs and alcohol as well. And yeah, I don't even remember what I ate for food in high school. Like I remember eating so much candy. I would have a couple classic like meals that I would make after school, but I just remember doing drugs. Like, I feel like the food was not even like really a thought for me in as something that I would get pleasure from or like enjoyment. Like I was eating to survive and to lose weight and to like hit my goals. And then once I started doing drugs, like who needs food?
Yeah.
I've got ecstasy here. I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think that I was probably the same. Like, food for me was, like, the absolute enemy. I remember my mom, I remember, like, blacking out a few times because I hadn't eaten in so long. But I remember my mom, like, trying to force me to eat half a bagel or she wouldn't drive me to my friend's house. And that would literally be all that would sustain me for the entire day. For some reason, I also was only eating bread for a little while. Like, that was my only food I was, like, feeling like was okay to
carbs,
eat.
straight carbs.
Just bagels. Just straight bagels, half bagels at a time because a full bagel I thought was too much. But I had all kinds of weird rules. And yeah, I think one of the things that I thought was like really interesting was that people who tend to be a little bit more bulimic in their choices, and I don't want to just use the label bulimia because I think that like the standard bulimia type behavior is this like binge quality and then purging. And from my experience, like you can binge on alcohol and then purge your food, or you can binge on alcohol and you can purge through doing a huge workout the next day, or you might binge on food and then your purge may be throwing out everything in your fridge that you've deemed as like a bad food. So it doesn't always have to be this traditional physical purge that we always see kind of depicted in the movies or you think of traditionally. I think that you can have crossover from, let's say, alcohol and drugs on this cycle of binge. For me, it was binge, purge, restrict, binge, purge, restrict. And that cycle, when I was binging on one thing, let's say it was alcohol, like restriction and then purging would be showing up in other areas. So for me, let's say I binged on alcohol, I would probably feel guilty. I would be restricting on food, and then I would be purging usually by either throwing shit out or doing like crazy exercising to try and compensate for like the calorie and trying to sweat it out kind of thing that would be going on. I don't want to say that I've never traditionally purged because I for sure went through phases where I did.
Yeah.
But there was almost like this cycle that would swing, that would cross over, not just with disordered food and eating behaviors, but would overlap into the substances, but would still be what would be considered traditionally an eating disorder cycle.
That is such a good point, honestly, just like the purging of your cupboards. And that is something that I have probably done 1,000 times.
I still do it now, yeah.
It's such a cycle of like just not limiting yourself, eating what you want, at least when I was drinking, binging, eating McDonald's, like
throwing it all out.
And then the next day being like, fuck, like I'm gonna start Monday, I'm gonna do this diet, I'm gonna straighten up, and then throw out all the shit that I have in my cupboards just to buy it again in a couple weeks.
100%. And I think what's really interesting about that is that a few things. One is that bulimia apparently is much more episodic in nature, like what we're talking about. Like there are always like these stages, and it's kind of like very episodic instead of just like controlled restriction throughout. And there is, I guess, indications that people that are kind of into that episodic, more bulimic behavior have an increased impulsivity trait. And I thought that was really interesting because I do feel like I am very impulsive, especially when I'm into these types of behaviors. Like I'm making decisions in the moment, for the moment, only not considering later. And I think that is very impulsive. So I really related to that like episodic impulsive nature of the overlap.
I relate to that 100%, and I feel like I am impulsive in all aspects of my life, like from shopping to piercings to like I've gotten a tattoo on like a second date with somebody that like I barely knew. Not matching. I have my own tattoo. He didn't get anything. But it was like we just walked in off the street and I was like, yeah, I'll take a tattoo today. Thank you. So it's just like 100% I feel like that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other thing that's like really, important to consider when you start to think about that is like, is it actually the eating disorder or the substances? Because what seems to be very common for me is like the cycle, the patterns of the cycle. And it's not necessarily this commitment to binging on alcohol or ice cream or whatever. It's like, I will binge on shopping, I'll binge on ice cream, I'll binge on this, I will restrict food, I will restrict people, and I can purge all these different items as well.
It's tying in all the replacement addictions as well.
Exactly. Like it's like that hungry ghost thing that we've talked about a few times, that Gabor Mate talks about, is like, it's actually not about the food. I don't think it's about the substance. It's about you like regulating your internal emotional state and not having a better skill set and like riding this cycle or each of these behaviors. Like you do this one, you get a pleasure, and then you go back down, and then it's like you need to get out of that down feeling, so then you do the next thing. And so what I think is really interesting is that, is the issue that having an eating disorder makes you more predisposed to substance use because there's like a psychological patterning that you're trying to fill the needs? Is like, how does one lead to the other?
Are you just using them both as a coping mechanism for past traumas, stress, like all the things that you have going on, which I think is 100% what I do. Yeah. And because like when I was younger, like I did see a therapist a little bit, but I don't feel like it was really like an open learning experience for me. So I didn't learn those skills when I was like in high school experiencing these things and these traumas for the first time. So now in my early 30s, when I'm finally like developing the proper coping mechanisms, I still have all this old information that I used to get through it when I was in my teens, that now it's like trying to find a space between the healthy coping mechanisms and the not so healthy ones.
Yeah. And I wonder, if you like, it's hard to have the awareness or the clear memory of how many times you maybe binge ate when you were a kid to avoid your feelings because that was like what was accessible to you. But you don't really think of it that way because at that age, you're probably not trying to, or you know what? I can remember trying to want to alter my body like as far back as grade 6, but even younger than that, I'm sure I was using food as a comfort in a disordered kind of way, like not listening to my body cues if we're really going to, get granular about it. But yeah, it is interesting the amount of overlap between the two.
Yeah. And it really like does come back, I think, to like those formative years, like in your teens. Like being a teenager is fucking brutal. I can't even imagine being a teenager now. And like even just like with social media, like why even back then were we trying to change what our bodies looked like? Like where did we learn that we were not good enough as we were?
Yeah, and I think obviously I can only imagine that now it would be so much tougher for teenagers because there is just so much unrealistic expectations put out there on social media and like, you know, so many filters that what people see, whether you're aware of wanting to attain that or not, I do think that there's this like subconscious drive, like in a sense of belonging and wanting to be desirable that is like it's innate within our DNA as a survival sense that affects you, whether you're aware of it or not. Yeah, so I think one of the things that you know, I was not expecting when earlier this year I fully removed alcohol was how many disordered eating or like symptoms were going to come up for me, like how much I was going to deal with body dysmorphia and honestly, truly eating disorder symptoms, like being symptomatic. You know, those are things that, you know, I went for professional treatment for like about 10 years ago and honestly hadn't really been struggling with like so much and thought kind of like that chapter or that aspect of my life was like over and done with. I don't know, Keisha, do you feel like, you know, you experienced disordered eating or some symptoms like that as you've, you know, since you've removed alcohol?
Yeah, not only since I have removed alcohol, but like I think from my entire life, like that diet culture, working out, sacrificing what I'm eating. But since I have removed alcohol for these last few months, 100%, I've really noticed myself binging. Yeah. So not so much the binge and restrict, it's just strictly binging. And that's like coming in sugar, like Uber Eats, I'm getting pizzas, pastas. It's kind of like a whatever you want situation. And I'm letting myself have all these things because I'm telling myself that it is keeping me sober from alcohol. But again, like at what price is that coming at? So I really have noticed that I'm not satisfied with what I'm eating. Like from a sugar perspective, it is too much. And I'm noticing the changes in my body, which then make me, I feel like kind of like question like my self-worth. Like if this is what my body looks like from the exterior, like am I like just the extremes. Yeah. Am I lovable? Who's going to love me looking like this? But I think the first step is really just like kind of being aware that that is what I'm feeling and trying to make better choices, not buying those things at the grocery store. But I think it really is like once you get into the habit and the mentality of that binge, restrict, whatever it is, it becomes a lifelong journey, I think, just like it is with substance use. It doesn't just go away because you want to change your mind about it.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, that one of the tricky things, and this is, you know, something that I remember speaking about when I was in treatment for an eating disorder, is just that you can have a full and successful life removing substances like alcohol or, you know, drugs, but you have to come to peace with food. You unfortunately cannot just be like, today or for the rest of my life, I will be removing food. Like you need to have food. And so it's one of those relationships that you are actually forced to come to peace with and learn to accept and heal because you honestly have no other choice because it is a daily part of your life.
It's so hard, especially because I know how I feel when I eat certain things. And like, I'm not lactose intolerant, but I am sensitive to things like dairy. Yet I will get a pizza once a week and then feel bloated and feel like shit.
It's the impulsivity gene, it's not you.
And it's like, I know exactly how I'm going to feel after it. Why can't I just stop? Get something else. Like, it could be something equally delicious, but I'm choosing these things that I know don't make me feel good repeatedly.
I think it's like that. It's that fill though, because like I'm also doing the same thing, and I'm confirming that even though I'm not lactose intolerant, that nobody feels good after they overeat pizza. Not one person. Everyone feels like a blowfish.
A blowfish.
I just think of those like puffer fish.
That's
literally what I feel like. But you know, I'm for sure doing the same. Like. And it's almost like there's like a lack of an awareness that there's like this feeling of emptiness or whatever it is, like, because I still don't know exactly, that I'm trying to fill with food. And because I've removed alcohol, like I'm like eating to the point where I'm uncomfortable, where I don't feel like that was coming up for me consistently. Like, sure, I think that, and I want to be clear here, there's a difference between, you know, having Christmas dinner with your family and overindulging and eating too much, or versus like sitting at home by yourself and then like eating to discomfort.
Yourself.
Yeah, on a regular basis, because I think those are very two different kind of experiences. One where you're like almost actively making a choice to cause harm, because I do think, you know, when you eat continually to this point of physical discomfort, you're like, there is a harm element to your behavior. At least that's how I feel about it afterwards. I'm like, why am I like physically harming myself right now? And like, because I keep eating and I'm not feeling satisfied.
Yeah. The hungry ghost.
I know. The damn hungry ghost. Yeah, and I think we talked a little bit about, like, yeah, I think, like, my relationship with food has become a really big challenge for me over the past few months as I've been moderating and, like, removed alcohol.
It's ongoing. Like, that's my question is, when does it end? When is it just going to be easy?
Where is the destination?
That's my main question, is when does the easy breezy living come?
You know, what I find is really challenging is, like, there's almost like two aspects of self that I experience. There is like this aspect of Denise that is like, it should be really easy to follow exactly what you need to eat and make all of these choices, because like when you zoom out and you look at it from like a logical and analytical perspective, it's like, no, well, I know that doesn't make me feel good and I should be doing this. It seems like so easy to be able to execute. And that's also the part of me that is critical when I'm not able to follow through. But there is like this other part of me that clearly still wants to eat the pizza because it's delicious and there's like almost like a joy and enjoyment element.
It's like that dopamine hit.
Yeah.
It's like that same pleasure sensation.
Yeah. And I feel like those are almost those extremes, the black and white extremes that we talked about before of like, you know, I'm either not eating the pizza or I'm eating the whole pizza. Like there's no like gray area in the middle. And I think honestly, the gray area in the middle is the destination. It's a place of less attachment, less rigidity, and a lot of compassion. I think that honestly is the destination. What my ego wants is like the destination to be this place where I follow this perfect diet and have this perfect body. And that is, you know, just a really unrealistic expectation.
Like, is that going to bring happiness and clarity? Like,
but you get so tricked into thinking that. It's like, oh, I'm going to be so desirable, and then I'm going to have, like, I'm going to be happy, and, you know, like, I'm going to have so much love and acceptance and, like, all of these things. But what you need to be able, what I think your mind or that part of you that thinks it should be so easy doesn't understand is that what it takes in order to do that maybe steals or chips away at your soul and a little bit of happiness in order to do it. You know? Otherwise, everyone would be fucking doing it. So my question is like, given the amount of co-occurring eating disorder or disordered eating and substance abuse, do you have any thoughts on treatment or managing both in early sobriety?
If I did, I wouldn't be here.
Just kidding. Well, that was honest.
Honestly, like, all I can say is, like, follow your intention. Like, for me, your intuition, sorry. Like, for me, like, I feel like I do have that internal gut instinct when I am making these food choices, or, like, when I was drinking. Like, I knew in the moment that it wasn't the right choice and I'm not going to feel good. So I truly need to, like, lean into that and just trust myself. And, like, maybe it is going to be really hard in that moment, but over time, making hard decisions, those decisions aren't going to be so hard anymore. But that's really the only advice I have, is to like follow your gut and maybe sit down and like see, like, as much as it may be triggering to like keep something like a food journal, but just take note of what you're ingesting and how it's making you feel, and how do you want to feel in your body. Like, do you want to feel bloated and have acne? Or do you want to wake up and feel fresh and rested and have great bowel movements? Like, what's the goal?
How's your poop?
Yeah. Poop is a big factor.
I think, like, for me, one of the things that I find really frustrating is the lack of like these holistic treatment options that are really out there for people. And, you know, I think there's not enough treatment overlap between the two. And I know that people cannot be treated for an eating disorder when they're actively using substances. I mean, I think that makes sense, because obviously it's like very difficult to get into talk therapy or like into cognitive patterns if you're not clear and, you know, literally fucked up all the time. But what I find challenging is that often treatment is kind of pigeonholed in a lot of traditional treatment centers into either substance, you know, use or eating disorders. Like, I know some therapists will maybe kind of talk to and do both, but if you're somebody who needs something that's a little bit more intensive than that, whether it's inpatient or outpatient, I think it's really difficult to find treatment that actually deals with both kind of together.
Yeah, and to be honest, like, that's not ever something that I've explored in terms of like treatment options, honestly, for either like disordered eating or for substance use. But I do think that makes sense that the treatment is sort of specialized in one department. But I think that there is such a big opportunity for a more holistic approach to everything, because the roots of these actions are probably the same.
Yeah, and I think I was really, really blessed when I was in treatment for disordered eating, that the therapist and center that I was at, and I did outpatient, was their values were really about that it wasn't about the food. It was really kind of tying back into that hungry ghost of like, what is it that you're trying to fill? And we didn't really dive deep into my substance use, because I think that the rationale there was just like, it's the same root issue. And I really firmly believe that. And I do hope
too.
that is like really carried through into a lot of treatment programs. And I unfortunately don't think, from what I understand, is that it is. And in my opinion is that it really should be, because I think that those root issues are likely the same for both of those co-occurring behaviors.
And I think that where we are maybe starting to see a little bit more of the overlap is in the more non-traditional treatment options, like coaches, like personal coaches, versus actually seeing a psychologist or a doctor.
Yeah.
I don't know if you listened last week to our episode, but we had a really great conversation with Nicole Worth. She is the founder of Wildly Alive, and she is also a coach, and talks about her own struggles with addiction and disordered eating, body image. And for her as well, the root causes were the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think disordered eating behavior becomes in and of itself its own addiction. Like, if you're not comfortable in your life, like, just that obsession of that thing to be totally sucked into every single day so that you don't have to be present in your life and just deal with the fear of everyday living, because there are a lot of things that feel uncomfortable, whether that's, speaking out in class or starting a new job, or maybe even looking for a new job or an exam you have like coming up, or things like that people get so caught up in these like food and body and health addictions that are disordered eating behaviors as well.
And it's because at the end of the day, like, all day somebody might be going through these stressors, and then when they're winding down at the end of the day, they sit on their couch by themselves, a lot of people, and get on social media, and all you're seeing is these idealized bodies and lives of other people.
Yeah, and if I change that about myself, then I'll be more like them.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is like is subconscious. But I think, yeah, all of these things are just our ways of taking ourselves out of our bodies and taking ourselves out of the discomfort of being present. And the root of those can be, I think different from person to person. But I think, some of the things that really drive us towards that are just, as you said, social norms, social media, peer pressure, maybe underlying depression and anxiety. And then I think the big thing is like trauma, abuse, neglect, and unmet emotional needs in the home when you were a child growing up.
Yeah.
And those don't have to be these big, huge events. It can just be a small event, a conversation that happened.
So even just something as little as your parents getting divorced.
Yeah. I mean, I think it can even be like as small as you being a child and like drawing a picture and you not getting the praise from it that you hope to get as a kid. Because it's not about the event. It's about how you perceived that event from a nervous system level as a child will really predetermine how you like store that event in your body, and I think how it affects you moving forward into adulthood. It's not to say that, your parents should have been paying better attention. It's more just about how you're processing things when you're a child. Anyway, I think we touched on a lot of things here today, and know that, if you are in early sobriety, and you are having a lot of surfacing issues around food, like you are certainly not alone, and you are very much the norm. And, it's something obviously that both Keisha and I can really relate to.
I feel like we got another really great experience of Dr. Denise this week. Not a doctor, but we call her Dr. Denise. So thank you so much for listening. If you haven't listened to last week's episode, you can listen to it now, and it really touches on a lot of the same topics.
We'll see you next time.
Bye. This is Keisha and Denise signing off on another episode of Done With Debauchery. Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, please share and subscribe. You can also find us on Instagram at Done With Debauchery. See you next time.